warm, fuzzy idealism. Organize it for the whole world, not just Europe and South America, because every nation should be allowed to dream of participating in the World Cup. He called this year's 48-team tournament a huge success, pointing out that 9 of the 10 African teams reached the knockout stage. And on the surface, who is going to argue against letting more countries dream? That's the trick. It sounds lovely. It's designed to. But let us look at what expansion actually does to the tournament, starting with the 48-team format we are watching right now. This thing is already stretched thin. You've got 12 groups of 4, and to fill out a 32-team knockout round, not only do the top 2 from each group advance, but so do the 8 best third-place teams. Sit with that. 8 of the 12 third-place finishers went through. You could lose, draw, generally underwhelm, finish third in your group, and still march into the knockouts. The result is a group stage that took 3 entire rounds of fixtures to eliminate barely a third of the teams, which drains the jeopardy out of huge chunks of it and produces exactly what you've been half-watching all month: dead rubbers, mismatches, games with nothing riding on them because third place is a golden ticket anyway. Even Infantino's proudest boast quietly gives the game away. He brags that 9 of 10 African teams reach the knockouts. But stop and think about what that actually means. When almost everyone advances, advancing stops being an accomplishment. That's not a sign the field got stronger. It's a sign the bar got lower. Now double down. 64 teams means 128 matches, up from 104 this year, and double the old 64-match format, spread across so many time zones that fans are already watching games kick off at midnight and 9 in the morning. More teams, more games, more filler. And the knock-on problems get ugly fast. A 64-team field would need somewhere north of 20 stadiums, which basically guarantees that no single country could ever host a World Cup alone again. Co-hosting stops being a novelty and becomes the only option. You can already see the strain in 2030, which is being carved up across 6 countries on 2 continents, starting in South America for the centenary, and then flying the whole circus across the Atlantic to Spain, Portugal, and Morocco. A tournament that used to be hosted by one nation is turning into a logistical patchwork, and the football gets buried under the timetable. When the schedule itself becomes the story, something has gone wrong. So let's take it seriously for a second, because the honest answer here isn't just to sneer, and there's a real case on the other side. The underdog stories at this World Cup have been genuinely magical. Cape Verde, a tiny island nation, went toe-to-toe with Argentina and terrified them. Norway rode Erling Haaland all the way to a quarter-final nobody predicted. Africa as a whole had a brilliant tournament. And there's something real in Infantino's point that when small nations get a genuine shot at the big stage, kids in those countries start dreaming and federations start investing. Inclusivity isn't a con by itself. Previous expansions in 1982 and 1998 were absorbed just fine, and the World Cup survived. If the argument were purely more countries get to play, reasonable people could disagree and move on. But that's not the whole argument, and it's the quality where this falls apart. Because for every glorious Cape Verde, this format also served up a pile of forgettable, low-stakes mush, and 64 teams would only thicken the mush. The entire point of a World Cup is that it's the hardest party on the planet to get into. That scarcity is the prestige. That's what makes qualifying mean something. Water it down until almost a third of all 211 FIFA nations are in, and finishing at the World Cup stops being an achievement and starts being an attendance record. This isn't just fans grumbling either. Veteran manager Carlos Queiroz warned about protecting that feeling of achievement for nations that qualify. UEFA President Alexander Ceferin flatly called 64 teams a bad idea. CONCACAF's president said it isn't the right move for the tournament itself. The people who actually run the confederations of world football are lining up against this. The World Cup is supposed to be the best against the best, not half the planet showing up for the participation trophy. And here's a telling detail about who's actually pushing this. The 64-team idea didn't bubble up from fans or players. It came from CONMEBOL, South America's governing body, which formally proposed it for the 2030 centenary. Meanwhile, UEFA, CONCACAF, and Asia's Confederation are all against. So the map of support looks less like a football consensus and a lot more like a political alliance, with Infantino leaning toward the bloc that hands him the outcome he wants. When one region proposes doubling the tournament and the rest of the sport says no, and the president's ears perk up at the yes, you're allowed to ask who this is really for. So if the football people mostly hate it, and the quality argument is against it, why is Infantino so keen? And here's where the fairy tale about dreams quietly gives way to the two things this is genuinely about: money and power. Take the money first, because it's almost comically obvious once you look. More teams means more matches, and every single extra match is a new revenue stream. More broadcast rights to sell, more tickets, more sponsorship inventory, more hospitality packages. FIFA expects to pull in somewhere around $16 to $17 billion from this 39-day tournament alone. Infantino's reaction to that number? He called it quite satisfactory, which might be the understatement of the decade. Forbes reported FIFA expects roughly $9 billion from 2026 on its own, more than the governing body made across the entire previous four-year cycle that included the Qatar World Cup. Broadcasting alone is nearly $4 billion. So when Infantino says every nation should be allowed to dream, there's a colder translation running underneath it. Every nation is a new television market, a new sponsor base, a new stack of ticket buyers. Expansion isn't charity, it's inventory. And this is a governing body that has spent the entire tournament finding new things to charge for. Infantino proudly noted stadiums are running at 99.7% capacity, and openly boasted that tickets some fans complained were too expensive are now being resold on the secondary market for 4 or 5 times their original price, as if fans getting gouged twice is a feather in FIFA's cap rather than an indictment. He waved away the hydration break criticism, even while admitting it sparks a lot of debate. Every complaint gets the same answer. The money's rolling in, so what's the problem? When the metric of success is purely how full the tills are, of course you conclude the fix for any tournament is simply to make it bigger. Now the power, because this is the part that ties it all together, and it's arguably the real engine. FIFA's president isn't elected by fans or by quality. He's elected by the 211 member federations. And here's the crucial bit. A tiny nation gets exactly the same single vote as a giant like Germany or Brazil. One country, one vote. So a policy that suddenly gives small footballing nations a realistic shot at the World Cup is also, conveniently, a policy that earns Infantino the eternal gratitude of the exact voters he needs. And with a FIFA presidential election due in early 2027, the timing is not subtle. Critics argue that let every nation dream is not really a footballing philosophy at all. It's a re-election slogan. Hand 100 small federations a bigger seat at the table, and you've bought 100 votes dressed up as generosity. Money to fund the machine, votes to keep control of it. That's the deal. And if you want the single most perfect symbol of what FIFA has actually become, forget the team numbers for a second, because this one you genuinely cannot make up. FIFA is now selling the grass. Literally. They are chopping up the pitch from the July 19th final at MetLife Stadium and selling it in little chunks for $450 apiece. Each fragment sealed in a premium acrylic block with a USB stick attached. Marketed as your chance to own a genuine piece of football history. They couldn't even be bothered to specify whether the 17.5 measurement on the listing is inches, centimeters, or millimeters, and didn't respond when asked. That's the level of care here. And the punchline that makes it art? Players and coaches have spent the tournament complaining that the MetLife pitch is poor, because it's normally artificial turf for NFL games. So FIFA is selling you $450 souvenir squares of a field the actual footballers think isn't good enough. Stack that on top of final tickets going for as much as $32,970, and the hydration breaks that everyone clocked were really just extra advertising windows, and the picture snaps into focus. This is not a sporting organization that happens to make money. It's a money machine that happens to host a football tournament. And the two have stopped even pretending to be the same thing. So yes, Infantino calls this World Cup a triumph. And for his balance sheet and his ballot box,